I've always liked history, and I've always been interested in pretty much any period of history, but having attended the unique summer school and looked at classics, that helped me decide that actually this period is the period I'm particularly interested in.
I can't imagine doing ancient history without archaeology, and if you're doing the archaeology of the classical world, you're going to need to know the ancient history too. I mean, because if you're working on something like iconography, it's just impossible without knowing the full political history.
The Classical Archaeology and Ancient History degree is a 3-year degree which gives you the opportunity to study the ancient Mediterranean world. So that's the Mediterranean in the period of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, although it extends beyond that.
There aren't many places where you can do it so much together and so integrated.
What makes the degree special is that it's not simply that these are 2 separate strands, but that a large part of it is taught through joint classes where there is both an archaeologist and an ancient historian leading the class. And that's then complemented by tutorials in different papers that are more historical or more archaeological in their focus.
Lots of people can stay on the straight and narrow a bit more, doing more nearer to Hadrian, and Athenian democracy, that kind of thing. Or you can go kind of totally different and end up doing sexuality and gender and bigger ideas like that. You can do a lot of things very, very quickly.
Throughout my first year, it was a case of finding my feet and finding where my interests lie. And because the first year teaching, you get to do a bit of both Greek and Roman, it allowed me to decide that my interests definitely lie with the Roman.
The degree doesn't have a compulsory language element in it, and that's one of the things that differentiates it from the classics degree. But it gives you the opportunity to either learn the language from the beginning. If you haven't got Greek and Latin, you can take one of those up from the start. Or if you already have either Greek or Latin, you did some study at school, you have the option to carry on with that. You still read texts, albeit mostly in translation for the Classical Archaeology Ancient History degree, but the thing that really marks it out is an emphasis on bringing the material and the visual world to bear.
It's a completely exciting world of military history, of economy, of politics. So it takes all the best things of history and you find it laid out in floor plans and archaeology and texts.
You kind of realise how much more there is to know. That certain preconceptions you have about the ancient world aren't necessarily true.
When you pick your options going into your second year, you're allowed to weight it more towards one or the other. So I personally weight it towards ancient history. But through core classes where you mix the 2 disciplines, they encourage you to keep them both going.
Fieldwork is a core part of the degree. There is a requirement for the students to do 2 weeks of actual fieldwork over the summer at the end of their first degree, and they're actively assisted with that, both financially and in terms of finding an excavation to work on, and they then have to produce a report on it.
I was out in Spain for a month and I had that covered by my college, and it was a lot of fun.
The department offers throughout the year all sorts of opportunities to take part in conferences and seminars, fieldwork trips abroad.
In the second half of the degree, one of the assessed elements is a museum or site report, which is essentially a mini thesis.
I am working on a report on a bronze cup from South Wales called the Leopard Cup, and investigating where it tells us about the import of luxury into Roman Wales.
Oxford's a particularly good place to study the ancient Mediterranean, the classical world and classical archaeology because of the wealth of resources that it has available.
I personally really love the library system because there's the faculty library, a college library and the centralised Bodleian library. So if you need a book, you can pretty much find it absolutely whenever it is needed.
The Sackler Library, which is a dedicated library and one of the richest in the country, if not the world, for materials on the Greek and Roman world and archaeology.
I also really like the Ashmolean because it's a working research museum.
You also have the Archaeological Institute, which is a house on Beaumont Street. It's kind of a nice townhouse, always feels very busy, lots of archaeologists kind of walking around and free coffee.
Because of a very well-established, well-respected classics faculty, we benefit from sharing the resources and also from having teaching provided by some of the leading experts in their field. I really enjoy the tutorial system. Initially it's quite intimidating, but once you get to know your partner, the tutor itself, is a really brilliant way of learning because you can raise any issues you've had, and they're also really good at giving you positive feedback when you've done something right.
Tutorial teaching is fantastic because the students are constantly pushing at you, pushing back, exploring for themselves, and so every tutorial is theoretically on the same topic each year, but in reality is different every single time.
They're actually very enthusiastic people. I mean, their main job is not teaching undergraduates, their main job is writing clever things for journals. And so it's really great that these guys are sparing their time to talk to you once a week or something about what they do and what you kind of want to do.
If you want to study this degree, then fundamentally you just have to be interested in the ancient world and want to study the ancient world. There are no specific subject requirements. You might have done something like classical civilization A-level, but you don't need to have done. It's an interest in antiquity, it's an interest in material culture, and the way you show that is by having shown that you're interested in it, wider reading, going to museums.
The interview process acted much like I imagined the tutorial system would act. It was fun, you learnt a lot. The important thing is not to be afraid to admit that you don't actually know something, because that way you engage and discuss, and it was actually quite an enjoyable experience where you got to discuss what you was interested in.
There are almost no wrong answers. You really just need to express yourself, say what you see, answer the question, and be prepared to stand up for yourself, argue the point. Tutors are looking for somebody who is actually both enthusiastic and thoughtful.
It must have been about 11 o'clock in the morning or something, so I was definitely in bed. And this phone was ringing downstairs and I had to go downstairs and get in. It was really annoying. But it was Peter Tillman saying I got in, which was nice. Good start to the day.
Students who've taken this course go on to do all sorts of different things. Some of them go on to further graduate study and ultimately end up teaching in academia or working as field archaeologists, but equally they go on to school teaching, to work in the government, to work in the city. I have one former student who, at least for a time, I think was working for an oil firm. The world, in a sense, is your oyster still at the end of it.
I am inclined towards further study, but ultimately I'd like to work in a museum context because there are museums all over the world.
If you have an interest and ability to visualize, think spatially, to good observation skills on top of an interest and enthusiasm for reading, then it's certainly going to appeal.